My sister abandoned her 3 children on my doorstep and flew to Paris with a man I'd warned her about. When I called for help, the police came for me. But the paper trail I kept quietly changed everything. I had not seen my sister in 4 months when she rang my doorbell at 7:40 on a Tuesday morning. I remember the time exactly because I'd just poured my second cup of coffee and set the timer on my phone. I do that now. Ever since the burnout, ever since the months where I lost whole afternoons staring at a wall and couldn't tell you what I'd been thinking about, I've kept my day carved into small, manageable pieces. Coffee at 7:30, work at 8, a walk at noon whether I want one or not. Structure, my therapist called it. Scaffolding for a person who had, not long ago, quietly come apart. So when the bell rang, my first thought wasn't even curiosity. It was irritation at the interruption. I wasn't expecting anyone. I don't get deliveries that early. I set my coffee down on the windowsill next to the little ceramic mug, the ugly, wonderful one the kids had painted for me 2 birthdays ago, all lopsided flowers and Oliver's careful blue letters spelling Aunt Lucy, and I went to the door in my socks. I opened it, and there was Camille. For a half-second, my heart lifted the way it always does when I see her. Some stubborn animal reflex from childhood that no amount of disappointment has ever fully trained out of me. She was beautiful the way she is always beautiful, effortless and expensive-looking in a camel coat and sunglasses pushed up into her hair. And then I looked past her, and the reflex died in my chest. Behind her, on my narrow front path, stood my nephew Oliver, 10 years old in his school uniform with his backpack on. Next to him, Ivy, who was 7, clutching a stuffed rabbit that had seen better decades. And in the car seat that Camille had already set down on my welcome mat, buckled in and blinking up at the gray morning, was Rosie, 16 months old. My baby niece, who was so surprised to see me that she gave me a gummy, delighted grin. There were suitcases, 3 of them, and a diaper bag and a plastic tub of what turned out to be formula and pull-ups and a scooter and a booster seat leaning against my hydrangea. "Don't be dramatic," Camille said before I'd said a single word. That was how I knew. "Camille," my voice came out very flat. "What is this?" "It's a favor." She smiled her event planner smile, the one that turns a catering disaster into an intimate rustic experience. "The tiniest favor. Dorian surprised me we're doing Paris. 4 days. Well, 5 with the travel. And the sitter fell through and Mom's got her hip and I thought, who's better than their own aunt? They adore you." "You didn't call me." "I'm calling you now." "You're standing on my step." "Same thing." She was already checking her watch, a thin gold thing I didn't recognize. "The car's coming in 10 minutes. Oliver's got his lunch money. Ivy needs the pink medicine if her cough comes back. It's in the bag. Rosie's on the little jars now. She likes the orange ones. Lucy, honestly, you're not even doing anything. You work from home. You're just sitting here anyway. You're just sitting here anyway." I want you to understand something about that sentence, because it is the sentence I kept coming back to in the weeks that followed. To Camille, my whole life, my careful scaffolding, my recovery, the quiet, deliberate work of stitching myself back together after I'd fallen apart, all of it registered as sitting here anyway. An empty room she was entitled to fill. "How long?" I said. "I told you, 5 days. You have 3 children under 11, and you're leaving them for 5 days with someone you decided to ask after you packed their bags. God, you sound like Mom." She crouched down quickly and kissed the top of Ivy's head and squeezed Oliver's shoulder. "Be good for Aunt Lucy. I'll bring you something from the Eiffel Tower." Then, to me lower so the kids wouldn't hear, "Don't make this a thing, please. Dorian's already stressed about the flights." Dorian? The man I'd met exactly twice. The man who called himself a wellness entrepreneur and who, at the one dinner I'd been permitted to attend, had told me, a person he'd known for 90 minutes, that my scarcity mindset was probably what had made me sick. The man who had somehow, in 8 months, moved into my sister's house, into her finances, and into the space where her judgment used to be. A car pulled up at the curb. A black one, gleaming, and there he was in the back seat, not even getting out, just lifting one hand in a lazy little wave through the tinted glass, like a man waving from a magazine. "Camille," I said, "do not do this." She was already walking backward down the path, blowing kisses. 5 days, you're a lifesaver, I'll text you. And then the door of that black car closed, and it pulled away, and I was standing in my own doorway in my socks with 3 of my sister's children and enough luggage for a small expedition, and the cold coming in around my ankles. Ivy looked up at me. "Aunt Lucy," she said, "is Mommy coming back?" I looked at her small, worried face, and at Oliver's careful blankness, the way he'd already arranged his features to show nothing, the way a 10-year-old learns to do when he's the oldest and he's decided it's his job to not be a problem. And I looked at Rosie, grinning up at me, trusting me completely, as though the whole world were a safe and reliable place. I got down on my knees on the cold path and I gathered them in. "Yes," I said. "She's coming back, and until she does, you're safe with me. Every single one of you." I meant it with my whole heart. That was the part nobody wanted to remember later. Every choice I made after that morning, I made for those 3 kids. But standing there on that step, holding them, I already knew, in some deep and dreading place, that this was not really about a 5-day trip to Paris. This was about a crack that had been running through my family for a long, long time, and it was about to run all the way through. The first day, I told myself I could do this. I am nothing if not a person who makes systems. By 9 that morning, I'd texted my one work contact to push a deadline, called the community college to say I'd need to record my lecture from home this week, and drawn up a schedule on the whiteboard in my kitchen, the same whiteboard I'd bought during recovery, where I wrote things like "You have done hard things before." Now it read school run 8:15, nap 1:00, bath 6:30. I stocked the fridge. I found the pink cough medicine in the diaper bag, exactly where Camille said it would be, which almost made me softer toward her, until I found the receipt tucked in with it and saw it had expired 11 months ago. That was the first small wrong note. I set it on the counter and I kept circling back to it all day, the way you do with a splinter. Because here is the thing about children, they don't fake it well. Oliver, who I remembered as a chatty, funny kid who used to narrate elaborate stories about his stuffed animals, had gone quiet and watchful. At dinner, he ate everything on his plate very fast, almost defensively. And when I offered seconds, he said, "No thank you," in a way that made my stomach hurt, because it was the voice of a kid who has learned not to ask for more. Ivy cried at bedtime, not tantrum crying, but small, exhausted, leaking tears. And when I asked what was wrong, she said, "Sometimes at home nobody comes." "Nobody comes when?" "When I call at night." I sat on the edge of that borrowed bed and I kept my face very calm because that is a skill I have, and inside I felt something cold turn over. "Well," I said, "in this house somebody always comes. I promise, try me, call me tonight and see." She called me twice, both times I came. The second day, Camille texted, not to ask how her children were. She sent a photograph of a croissant on a marble table and the words "Heaven. Dorian says hi." I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed and deleted 4 different replies before I settled on, "The kids are fine. Ivy's cough is back. Please call them tonight, they miss you." She left me on read for 6 hours. Then, at what must have been nearly midnight in Paris, "Can't tonight, dinner thing, kiss them for me." Face blowing a kiss. I put the phone down on the windowsill next to the ugly ceramic mug, and that was when I noticed the crack. It was a hairline thing, running up from the base through Oliver's careful blue L in Lucy. I don't know when it happened. I picked the mug up and turned it in the light, and I thought I should throw this out before it breaks all the way and cuts someone. And then I thought, no, not this one. I set it back down, but I kept noticing it after that. Every time I filled my coffee, I'd catch the line of it, and every time it seemed a fraction longer, though of course that was impossible. It was only that I was finally looking. By the 3rd day, I understood this was not a 5-day arrangement in any way that mattered. There was no return flight information. When I asked Camille to send it, just so I can plan the school pickup Monday, she sent back a laughing emoji and Dorian's handling the tickets, "Don't stress." When I asked her, gently, whether everything was okay, whether she was okay, she went cold in that particular way she has and wrote back, Why does everyone assume I need saving? I'm having the best week of my life. You should try being happy for me instead of judging. Everyone. Who was everyone? Our mother, whom Camille had barely spoken to in months. Her old friends, the ones who'd stopped being invited to things once Dorian arrived. I found Oliver's school folder in his backpack that night, and inside it, 3 unopened letters addressed to his parent or guardian. 2 were about missed assignments. The third, dated 6 weeks earlier, was from the school counselor, requesting a meeting to discuss Oliver's recent withdrawal and changes in behavior. It had never been opened. I sat at my kitchen table with those 3 letters and my cold coffee and the cracked mug, and I did what I have trained myself to do when the room starts to tilt. I breathed. I named 5 things I could see. And then I got out a notebook, a fresh one, the good kind, the kind I use for work when I need every entry time-stamped and clean, and I wrote down the date and the time and everything I knew. I did not know yet that the notebook would matter. I only knew that something in my family had cracked a long time ago, quietly up from the base, and that I had spent years pretending I couldn't see the line. I was done pretending. To explain why any of this landed the way it did, I have to tell you who I've always been to Camille. Or rather, who she's always let me be. Our mother raised us mostly alone, and she was tired in the way that single mothers of a certain era were allowed to be tired, bone-deep, uncomplaining, always at work. Camille was the older one, the bright one, the one who lit up rooms. I was the steady one, the one who remembered the permission slips. When Mom worked doubles, it was me who learned to make dinner at 11, me who did Camille's laundry alongside my own because otherwise it didn't get done, me who covered for her when she snuck out, me who sat up waiting so that when she came home there'd be somebody there. Somebody always comes. I'd built my whole childhood around being that somebody. And I kept being her that somebody into adulthood. When she got pregnant with Oliver at 30 and the father evaporated, I took 2 weeks off work. I couldn't afford to sleep on her floor and change newborn diapers at 3 a.m. when Ivy came, same. When she left the man who fathered Ivy, I helped her move. When money got tight, I loaned her sums I never mentioned again because mentioning them felt cruel, and because, honestly, I never really expected them back. When Rosie was born and Camille cried on my couch that she couldn't do 3, I told her she could, that I'd help, that I would always help. I meant it. That was my whole problem. I always meant it, and she always knew I meant it, and somewhere in there my yes stopped being a gift and became a utility, like a tap she could turn on without thanks. Then, 8 months before that Tuesday morning, she met Dorian. He came to Sunday dinner at Mom's the first time, the last real family dinner we had, as it turned out. He was handsome in a manufactured way, tan out of season, teeth too even, a linen shirt open 1 button past charming. He shook my hand with both of his and held eye contact a beat too long, and told me it was so grounding to finally meet Camille's family. That family was the only real currency. Over dinner, the wrong note started, small enough that I doubted myself. He said he'd built and sold a wellness platform in Austin. Then, 20 minutes later, telling a different story, he said he'd spent those same years off-grid in Costa Rica finding himself. Both could be true, I supposed, but I'm a coder. My whole job is noticing when 2 records that should match don't, and these didn't quite. He talked about money constantly, but always slantwise. He didn't ask what anyone earned. Instead, he'd say things like, Camille and I are really aligning our resources right now, and the old model of keeping separate accounts is honestly a poverty mindset. Real partners pool their energy, financial and otherwise. He said it warmly, philosophically, gazing at my sister like she was the answer to a question, and she gazed back like she'd never been looked at before. The tell that stayed with me came at the end of the night. Mom, trying to be kind, asked Dorian about his family, where he was from, whether they'd meet his people. And a shudder came down over his face, just for an instant before the warmth flooded back. I'm a bit of a lone wolf, he said smoothly. My real family is the people I choose. Which is a lovely thing to say, and also, I have since learned, exactly the thing a man says when there is a trail of people behind him he would very much prefer you never spoke to. After that dinner, the walls started going up. Camille stopped coming to Mom's. Then she stopped calling Mom back. Then, when I texted to check in, the replies got shorter, cooler, more curated, until they were just photographs of her new, glossy life. A life that I slowly noticed had fewer and fewer other people in it. No mention anymore of her friend Deb, who'd been her friend for 20 years. No mention of the part-time bookkeeper who used to help her run the event's business. Just Camille and Dorian and the caption "My Whole World." And now 3 children on my doorstep, and a black car pulling away, and a man waving through tinted glass like a man who had everything perfectly under control. Sitting at my table on that third night, with the counselor's unopened letter in front of me and my niece finally asleep upstairs after calling for me twice, I understood that Dorian had not simply come into my sister's life. He had been quietly clearing it out. And the children were the last things left that tied Camille to anyone but him. Getting them off her hands for a week wasn't a favor she was asking of me. It was a favor someone was asking of her. I looked at the crack in the mug on the windowsill, longer now in the lamplight, running clean up through my own painted name. Then I picked up my phone, and I did the thing that would, 2 days later, bring the police to my door. I did not call Child Protective Services in a rage. I want that on the record because later people tried to paint it that way, and it wasn't true. What I did first, that third night, was call the non-emergency line for our county and ask a question. Just a question. If a parent has left minor children with a relative and cannot be reached with any return date, and if there are documented signs that those children may not have been adequately cared for at home, what were my options and my obligations? The woman I spoke to was kind and careful, and she told me that what I was describing was worth a formal welfare check-in, and that I should call the Family Services intake line in the morning and simply tell them what I'd told her. She said something I held on to: "You're not getting anyone in trouble. You're getting a set of professional eyes on 3 kids. That's all it is." So the next morning, while Oliver was at school and Ivy watched cartoons and Rosie napped, I called. I was calm. I read from my notebook. I gave the timeline, the drop-off with no notice, the missing return date, the counselor's unopened letter, the expired medicine, Ivy's nobody comes. The intake worker, a man named Curtis, listened and took it seriously and told me a caseworker would likely want a visit, and that in the meantime I was doing exactly the right thing by keeping the kids stable, fed, and in school. I hung up and I felt, for the first time in days, like the ground was solid under me. And this is the turning point I keep coming back to, because it's the moment I stopped being the family's tap and became something else. For 34 years, I had reacted. I had absorbed. I had said yes and cleaned up and never kept score, because keeping score felt like the opposite of love. But that morning, sitting at my table with my time-stamped notebook, I understood that I had a skill nobody in my family had ever thought to be afraid of. I document things for a living. I reconcile records. I find the place where the story the numbers tell and the story a person tells stop agreeing. I opened the notebook to a clean page and I started building a file. I photographed everything. The 3 unopened school letters, the expired medicine and its receipt, every text Camille sent me, screenshotted with the timestamps visible, the croissant, the can't tonight, the why does everyone assume I need saving. I wrote down, verbatim, the things the children said, with the date and time beside each one, the way I'd log an entry at work. Not to weaponize them. To hold them so that if anyone ever asked me what had happened, I would not have to rely on my memory, which I no longer fully trusted, and which people had a habit of telling me was too dramatic. Then I did the thing that felt at the time like a small betrayal of my own dignity, and turned out to be the hinge the whole story swung on. I started looking into Dorian, not in a dark, obsessive way. I want to be clear about that, too. I did what any careful person can do in an afternoon. I searched his name. The wellness platform he'd supposedly built and sold in Austin returned nothing, no company, no announcement, no trace. The retreats he was always posting about, the ones Camille was now investing in, had a website that had been registered 4 months earlier and listed a business address that, when I looked it up, was a mailbox rental in a strip mall. Every testimonial on the site was a stock photo. I've reverse image searched enough profile pictures in my life to know a stock photo when I see one. None of that was proof of a crime. Lots of new businesses look thin, but it was a story that did not reconcile with itself, and I have spent my whole career learning to trust that feeling. I was still staring at that mailbox address when my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't know. "Hi, is this Lucy, Camille's sister? My name is Priya. You don't know me. I used to be in business with Dorian. I think we should talk, and I think it's important. I got your number from Deb, Camille's old friend. Please call when you can." I sat very still for a moment. Then I stepped out onto my back step, where I could see the kids through the window, but they couldn't hear me, and I called her. Priya was 45, steady-voiced, and clearly frightened in the specific way of a person who has decided to do a brave thing anyway. She ran a small accounting practice now, she said. 4 years ago, she'd gone into a wellness investment partnership with a charming man who'd called himself something other than Dorian, a different first name, though the middle name matched, and the face in the one photo she still had matched too. She'd put in her savings. She'd brought in 2 friends. Within a year the money was gone, the retreat properties had never existed, and the man had vanished, leaving her holding debts and a great deal of shame. There'd never been enough to bring charges that stuck, she said, because he was careful and because his victims were too embarrassed to come forward together. He targets women who are generous, she said. Women in a soft season, a divorce, a loss, a new baby. He finds the ones who give, and then he isolates them from everyone else who gives, so he's the only source of warmth in the room. And once he's the only warm thing, he can ask for anything. She paused. Deb told me he was with a woman who had 3 kids now. That's new. He never had the kids to deal with before. I got scared for them. "They're with me," I said. "The kids, right now, they're safe." I heard her exhale, a long, shaky breath, 300 miles away. "Then you're already ahead of where I was," she said. "But Lucy, if you're doing what I think you're doing, be careful. When he feels the walls closing in, he doesn't run first. First, he attacks. He'll find whatever makes you look like the unstable one, and he'll aim it right at you." I thanked her. I told her I might need to ask her someday soon to say all of that to someone official. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Send me the mug." I didn't understand. "Though I mean, whatever you need, yes, I'll say it. I should have said it 4 years ago." And she hung up. I went back inside. Ivy had fallen asleep on the couch with the ancient rabbit against her cheek, and Rosie was babbling to herself in the playpen, and the cracked mug sat on the windowsill catching the last of the light, and I stood there in my quiet house full of somebody else's children, and I felt the walls I'd been building all week finally connect into something that could hold weight. I did not yet know how right Priya was about what Dorian would do when he felt them closing. He felt it 2 days later. And he did exactly what she said he would. The caseworker had come by that morning, a brisk, kind woman named Marisol who spent 40 minutes in my home, watched the children, checked the fridge, asked Oliver a few gentle questions in the kitchen while I stayed out of it, and left saying she had no concerns whatsoever about the children's care in my home, only about the situation that had put them there. She gave me her card. She told me she'd be attempting to reach the mother. That, I realize now, was the match that lit the fuse. Somewhere in France, Camille got a phone call from a government office in another country and panicked and told the only person she trusted, and that person decided the best defense was a fast, dirty offense. I was giving Rosie her lunch when the police cruiser pulled up outside. 2 officers came to my door. Polite, but not warm. They said they'd received a report, a welfare concern of their own, that 3 minor children had been taken and were being kept at this address against the wishes of their mother, that the mother was frantic and unable to reach them, and that there was an allegation the person keeping them was unstable and had a documented history of mental health hospitalization. That last phrase went through me like cold water. Documented history, because it was almost true, and because almost true is the sharpest weapon there is. I had never been hospitalized. But I had, during my burnout, spent 2 weeks in an intensive outpatient program, and I had, God help me, mentioned it once at that single dinner when Dorian had leaned in with his warm fake concern and asked me about my healing journey. He had filed it away. And now he had handed my sister, or handed the police through my sister, a version of me that was frightening. An unstable woman who had snatched 3 children and was refusing to give them back. I felt the old tilt start. The room going long and strange, my heart in my ears, and then I looked past the officers through my own front window at my kitchen table, where my notebook sat, time-stamped. Clean, I breathed. I named 5 things I could see. And I said, in the calmest voice I have ever produced in my life, "Officers, I understand exactly why you're here, and I'm grateful you came because I have been worried about these children for 6 days. Everything you've been told is either false or turned inside out, and I can show you the record of all of it. May I bring you inside so you can see the kids are safe, and then may I show you my documentation? I don't want you to take my word for anything. I want you to see it." That, it turned out, was the difference between how this went and how Dorian expected it to go. He had counted on me reacting. Crying, shouting, getting defensive, matching the frantic energy, proving, in real time, that I was the unstable one in the story. Instead, I invited them in and made them tea. They saw the children, fed and calm, doing a puzzle on the floor. Ivy showed one of the officers her rabbit. Then I opened the notebook, and I walked them through it the way I'd walk a new coder through a reconciliation. Here is the drop-off, day and time, with the photo of the luggage on my step. Here are her texts, time-stamped, including the ones where I ask for a return date 6 times and get emojis. Here is the intake reference number from the County Family Services line, and here is Marisol's card from this very morning, who had been in this home 4 hours earlier and found no concerns. Here are 3 unopened letters from a school, 1 from a counselor. And here, I said, is the report you were given that I took these children, that their mother is unable to reach them, and here on the screen is her most recent text, sent 40 minutes ago. Dorian says, "Do not let anyone take my kids, tell them I am coming." She has my number, I said quietly. She can reach her children any hour of any day. She simply hasn't wanted to. The 2 officers looked at each other. The older one, who had come in with his jaw set, sat back a little. "Who told you I'd been hospitalized?" I asked. Because I never have been, and there's only one person alive who could have twisted that particular half-truth into that particular lie. His name is Dorian. He's the man who took my sister to Paris. And I'd like to tell you a little about him, if you have 10 minutes, because I don't think I'm the first person he's tried to make look crazy. I gave them Priya's name. I gave them the mailbox strip mall address behind a business my sister was pouring money into. I did not accuse him of anything I couldn't show. I just laid the records side by side and let the places where they refused to match speak for themselves. The older officer closed his own notebook. "Ma'am," he said, "these kids are clearly fine, and you're clearly not what we were told you were. I'm going to be honest with you, the report we got had some very specific language in it. The kind of language somebody feeds you." He tapped his pen against his knee. "You should talk to a lawyer. And you should keep doing exactly what you're doing with that book." They left. I sat down on the kitchen floor between Oliver's puzzle and Rosie's high chair, and I shook for about a minute, and then I stopped because a small hand had landed on my shoulder. Oliver, looking at me with an expression far too old for 10. "You didn't yell," he said. "At the police. Mom would have yelled." "Yelling doesn't work as well as writing things down," I told him. He nodded slowly, filing it away the way he files everything away. Then he said, very carefully, testing the ice, "Aunt Lucy, I don't think Dorian is nice." And having said the unsayable thing, the thing no adult in his life had let him say, he burst into tears, and I held him on the kitchen floor while he cried out 6 months of being the oldest and being quiet and knowing. Dorian's first attack had failed. So he escalated, exactly the way Priya warned he would. Camille cut the trip short, not out of concern, I'd learn, but because Dorian decided the optics required it. They flew home 2 days early, and the moment they landed, my phone became a war zone. Camille's texts swung wildly, and reading them in order was like watching someone being operated by remote control. First fury, "How dare you call the government on your own family? Do you know what you've done?" Then, an hour later, guilt-tripping in what I recognized as Dorian's exact vocabulary. You've always been jealous of my happiness. This is a scarcity thing. You can't stand that I finally have abundance. Then, near midnight, something that broke my heart because for one line it was actually her. I don't understand what's happening. Everyone's so angry. I just wanted a nice trip. Why is everything my fault? I wrote back only to that last one. It's not all your fault. Come see your kids, just you. Come alone and we'll talk. The reply came 20 minutes later and it was Dorian again, wearing her name. We'll come together as a family unit. I'm not being ambushed by your smear campaign. We'll pick up the children tomorrow at 10. We, not I. She couldn't even come get her own children without him in the room. Meanwhile, Priya and I built. She sent me documents, old emails, a partnership agreement with that other first name and the matching middle name, bank records showing money going into accounts that then dissolved. She connected me with one of the two friends she'd brought into his last scheme, a woman named Grace, who had lost $11,000 and, more than the money, had lost a year of her life to believing she was worthless because a charming man had told her, gently, over and over, that she was. Grace had never reported it. I thought it was just me being stupid, she said on the phone, and I heard my sister in her voice, and I heard, honestly, a little of my own old self. The woman who thought her generosity was a flaw to be exploited rather than a strength. I also did the thing that mattered most and was the least dramatic. I went to a lawyer. A family attorney named Fran, sharp and unhurried, who looked through my notebook and Priya's documents and Marisol's card and said 3 things I will never forget. First, you did everything right, and I almost never get to say that. Second, the person he tried to make look unstable brought a time-stamped ledger to a police visit. He picked the wrong sister. And third, more gently, but understand, the goal here is not to destroy him. The goal is those 3 kids and your sister. He's the obstacle. Keep your eye on the shore. Keep your eye on the shore. I wrote it on the whiteboard under "You have done hard things before." The second confrontation came the next morning at 10, and it did not go the way Dorian scripted. They arrived together, Camille pale and thin and jittery, Dorian glowing, in charge, doing the talking. He came into my living room like he was hosting it. He was warm. He was devastating. He told me in front of the kids until I sent them upstairs that he understood that I'd acted out of fear, that he held no resentment, that families heal through radical accountability, and he hoped I was ready to take mine. He was so good at it that I watched my sister's face turn toward him like a plant toward a lamp, and I felt the old despair, the sense that he would always win because he was simply better at the room than any honest person could be. And then I did the one thing he was not prepared for. I did not argue with him. I did not defend myself. I turned to Camille, and I set 2 things on the coffee table in front of her. The first was a printout of a partnership agreement, 4 years old, with a photograph of her Dorian smiling out of it, under a different name. The second was the cracked ceramic mug. Oliver's careful blue Lucy, the hairline split running clean up through it. I'm not going to fight him for you, I told her. He's better at fighting than I'll ever be. So I'm just going to show you 2 things and then I'm going to be quiet. I touched the printout. This is a woman named Priya. 4 years ago she was you. Generous in a hard season, so grateful someone finally saw her. She lost everything. There's another one named Grace. There are probably more. I touched the mug. And this is the cup your kids painted me. It's been cracking for 2 years and I kept using it anyway because I couldn't stand to lose it. That's you and me, Cam. I kept pretending we weren't breaking because losing you was worse than the crack. But it's all the way through now. And I would rather lose you fighting for your kids than keep you and watch this happen to them. The room was very quiet. Dorian laughed, a warm, tolerant, terrible laugh, and reached for the printout to sweep it aside, to explain, to reframe. Camille, love, this is exactly the kind of manufactured. But Camille had gone still in a way I had not seen since we were children waiting for our mother to come home. She was looking at the face in the 4-year-old photograph. And then she was looking at the name printed under it. And I watched something behind her eyes, some long-jammed mechanism, finally, quietly, turn over. Why, she said slowly, not to me, is your name different? The final reckoning did not happen at a dinner party, or in a screaming match, or anywhere that would have suited Dorian's talent for performance. It happened 11 days later, in a small beige conference room in Fran's law office, with a jug of water in the middle of the table and a box of tissues nobody touched until the very end. I had learned, by then, that the most devastating rooms are the quiet ones. After that morning in my living room, after Camille's soft, terrible question, "Why is your name different?" Dorian had done what men like him do when the reframing stops working. He'd gotten louder, then colder, then he'd tried to leave with her, actually reaching for her arm, and Camille had pulled it back from him for the first time in 8 months. He'd left alone. He did not go quietly in the days after. He sent Camille a barrage of messages that swung from love bombing to threats and back. He told her I had brainwashed her. He told her she was nothing without him and would lose the kids to the state without his guidance. Every one of those messages, Camille, newly, shakily awake, screenshotted and forwarded to me. She was documenting. She'd learned it from watching me on the kitchen floor with the police. Writing things down works better than yelling. The student had become, if not the master, at least a survivor with a paper trail. Fran had assembled the meeting. Present were myself, Camille, Fran, and, on a video screen at the end of the table, Priya and Grace, who had agreed to appear together, the thing they'd never managed 4 years ago. Also present, because Fran had insisted, and because Marisol had agreed it was warranted, was a detective from the county's financial crimes unit, a tired-looking man named Reyes who had, once the documents crossed his desk, become significantly less tired. Dorian came because Camille had asked him to. He thought, I am certain of this, that he was coming to win her back. He walked in glowing, in his linen and his tan, and he was 3 sentences into a warm speech about coming together to heal as a chosen family when he saw the screen. Saw Priya's face. Saw Grace's. And I watched the performance simply stop, the way a machine stops when the power's cut. For 1 second before he rebuilt it, his real face showed through, flat, calculating, and utterly without warmth. That was the face Priya had described. That was the face under all the linen. Camille saw it too. I heard her breath catch. I did not do the exposing. That's the part I want you to understand. This was never a story about me humiliating anyone. Fran did it procedurally, item by item, in a voice as dry as paper. The partnership agreement under a prior name. The bank records. The mailbox address behind the retreat business Camille had invested $31,000 into, nearly everything she had, plus a loan against her business, taken out, the records showed at his urging. Priya spoke steadily about 4 years ago. Grace spoke and cried and kept speaking anyway. Detective Reyes explained, without drama, that there was now an open investigation, that 2 prior complaints had been reopened, and that Mr. Dorian would want to secure counsel of his own. Through all of it, Dorian tried. Of course he tried. He was charming, then wounded, then philosophical. Then, when none of it landed on the wall of dry facts, briefly, unmistakably cruel, turning to Camille to say, "You're going to believe them over the man who..." And Camille, my sister, who had spent her whole life lighting up rooms and her last 8 months dimming in his, looked at him levelly across that beige table and said the most powerful thing I have ever heard her say. "My kids told my sister you weren't nice," she said. "My 10-year-old was braver than me. I believe him." And that was the moment she broke free. Not with a scream, with one quiet sentence, and then by picking up her bag and standing and walking around the table to sit down in the empty chair beside me instead of the one beside him. That was all. In a story that had started with a black car pulling away, it ended with my sister crossing a small room to sit on my side of the table. Dorian, for once in his life, could not find the words to reframe it. He left the way people like him always eventually leave. Quickly, alone, and already thinking about the next soft season and the next generous woman. But this time there was a detective with his real name, and a file, and 3 women on the record instead of one alone and ashamed. I would love to tell you that everything mended cleanly and fast. It didn't. Real healing is slower and less cinematic than the crack was. The consequences for Dorian came the way Fran predicted, not in one dramatic blow, but in the accumulating, inescapable weight of his own history finally catching up. Ray's investigation, fed by Priya's and Grace's testimony and the paper trail from 3 states, led to charges. Multiple counts of fraud and theft. It turned out there were not 2 prior victims, but 7, once women stopped being ashamed and started finding each other, several connected through Priya, who became, in her words, the person I needed 4 years ago. He took a plea rather than face all of them in a courtroom. He is serving time now. The retreat business dissolved, the fake website went dark, and the name he'd been using, the 3rd or 4th, we never learned the first, became one more entry in a public record that any careful woman with an afternoon and a search bar can now find. The money Camille lost, most of it, is gone. But Fran recovered a portion through the restitution order, and my sister has decided that the rest is simply the price of the most expensive lesson of her life. Camille and I did not fall weeping into each other's arms. That's not who we are, and it would have been a lie. What happened was smaller and, I think, more real. She moved back in with the kids for a while, into my too-small townhouse, and it was cramped and hard and we snapped at each other over dishes. But she got a therapist. She went, quietly, to a support group Priya recommended, for people who have been through exactly what she'd been through, and she came home from the first one having barely spoken, and from the 4th one having, she said, finally understood that it wasn't because I was stupid. It's that he's good at it. And I was tired, and I wanted someone to make things easy. She started saying thank you to me, not performatively, just noticing the tap she'd turned on for 34 years and turning it off, filling her own cup, learning to be somebody's somebody instead of only ever needing one. Oliver started seeing that school counselor whose letter had gone unopened. He talks more now. He narrates ridiculous stories about the dog we ended up getting. Ivy still calls out at night sometimes, but she calls out less, and someone always comes, her mother now, more often than me, which is exactly as it should be. Rosie will not remember any of it, and that is its own small mercy. As for me, I learned that my generosity was never the flaw. The flaw was giving it to people who'd learned not to value it, and never keeping a single record for myself. I still say yes, I just write things down now. I kept the whiteboard message up for months, keep your eye on the shore, and the mug, I did throw it out in the end. Camille found me holding it one evening, the crack run all the way through, and she said, "You should let that one go loose." And she was right. But the next week the kids and I painted a new one at one of those pottery places, all 4 of us, lopsided flowers and Oliver's blue letters, and this time it says Aunt Lucy on one side and on the other in Ivy's wobbly hand, "Somebody comes." It sits on my windowsill now, whole and a little ugly and entirely ours, and every morning when I fill it I check, out of habit, for a crack. There isn't one. Not yet. And if one ever starts, I'll see it early this time. That's the thing about finally learning to look.